I don't even write to my mother. I would never finish a book, you know. And he said, well, take $50 and don't do it for anybody else. Okay? All right. So I gave him his money back with a bottle of scotch some years later. I asked him, what would you like me to put in the book if I were to, you know. And then I started asking my friends, if you were to see a book that says How to Play Bass Solos by Red Mitchell, what would you expect to see in it, you know? And Ray's answer was, he said, oh, just write out some of your solos on records and put fingerings on them. And I said, no, Ray, I don't think I'd like to do that. If it's how to play a jazz bass solo, it would really have to be how do we play jazz, you know? How do we translate our feelings into music without losing too much in the translation? And so I did start thinking about it. I thought about it for 4.5 years, and I got about 3.5 pages. And then I was asked to do this, a clinic in Denmark, and they said I could choose my subject, so I chose communication. And I started talking about it. And since then I've been doing it. Now it's 23 years, and I've come to the point where I not only do not consider myself an expert in communication, I do consider myself an expert at the breakdowns of communication. I've experienced so many normal accidents, and that's what we take up in this course, is how it doesn't work. It's much easier to say how it doesn't work than how it does work. What can stop it from happening? And I would never, ever try to explain how it does work, because then we'd be getting into religion, and why do we feel at one with the universe sometimes, and how do we get there, and once we get there, how do we stay there, and so on. I would never try to explain that, but I can explain what can keep you from getting there, and we can talk about that, and I'm sure all of you have had at least one experience with communication breaking down that I never had. I hope you'll all contribute. So what we start with usually is communication within ourselves and with our instruments. Now, the only prerequisite for this course is the lust to play jazz. You don't have to be a jazz player. You could be a painter or a cellist, but you must have the lust to play jazz, or you must have had it. Is there anybody here who has never ever felt the lust to play jazz? Nobody? Okay, I mean, you could stay anyway. Okay, what we start with is, where does this lust come from? Why do we have it? Did Bach have it? It must have been, I understand when Bach performed, he improvised as much as he performed composed pieces, and Mozart too. They would play half a concert improvising, and the other half their greatest hits, you know, which everybody wanted to hear. I guess that was the jazz of the day. Anyway, we have a particular art form now that was born in America. It was born along with America's biggest birth defect, slavery, and the necessary violence that was institutionalized in carrying out slavery. And jazz turned out to be the silver lining of that cloud, and it has to do with the meeting of the European cultures and the African cultures in America and what came out of it. Is there anyone who has an idea why we have this lust to play jazz and where it comes from?
Could be because we like the expression of individuality that we don't get in other music.
I agree, 100%. Individuality, the expression of individuality that we don't get in other music. But there's a group feeling too, right? There's a group feeling in jazz that we don't get in other music either. The feeling of swinging, really swinging. You know,
coming together, everyone.
Yeah, like in the case of Count Basie's band, or you know, the prime example. I usually talk a little bit about politics, how we have these isms all over the world. If you take an ism to be a belief system, there are still a couple of chairs left, Arnie, if you want to. The one up here.
Go on, Red.
Go ahead. No. We have these isms, especially in Europe and America. We've had to, well, all over the world, we had this big contest going on between the two big C's, which are now the two little C's, capitalism and communism. And communism is telling us that we are first and foremost groupish animals. The individual doesn't matter that much. It's the group first, and the group always, and the individual never. Capitalism is telling us that it's the individual first, and second, and third, and devil take the hindmost, and the rest of the group, you know. And I think we have both urges within us. We have both instincts. We have the group instinct, we're groupish, and we're selfish. And so I think they're both right, so they're both wrong, because each one denies the other one. In jazz, we have a chance to be both selfish and groupish at the same time. In fact, we're supposed to be. The individual expression, a good jazz player is expected to develop a very individual sound and language, which can be identified anywhere in the world by 2 or 3 phrases. And at the same time, the jazz player is supposed to be a group person, a real group person, so that the sum of the group, the total power of the group is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's both and. And as I said, we have, I think, I have just a little theory that the survival of the species is actually the deepest instinct we have. We could talk about that. A lot of people think, oh, it's all number one, it's me, survival of me, you know, my genes. I don't really think so, but you can discuss it. I think really the deepest urge that life gives us is the survival of life itself. And so I think when we're playing jazz, if we're doing what we should, we're helping with the survival of the species. And if we do that correctly, we will then also be helping with the survival of the other species. Because of course we're interdependent. I have a song about that, but I don't have time to do it now. It's called Declaration of Interdependence. And it's the title of the song on a solo record that I just did in Sweden. So I think when we're playing jazz, we're dealing with, we're trying to take on and help with the survival of the human race, nothing less. And in doing that, we try to obey whatever the laws of nature are that make themselves known to us. I have a little theory about 4 states of consciousness. We have 4 levels of consciousness. We can be unconscious, which is when you're dead or whacked out, totally whacked out so that nothing's working. And then there's the subconscious level, which is always working, even when we're asleep. And then there's the conscious level, at which we find ourselves now, today, most of the time. And then there's the superconscious level, at which we can find ourselves if we allow ourselves to get there, and if we try to help other people get there. And that's the level at which we feel at one with the universe. And you can't make a mistake. Everything's perfect. The wrongest thing you could do would be say, "Oh, how did I get here? Did I have a drink before the green pill? I did the 2 white pills after the beer?" Or, you know, then you get right back down to conscious, and that's not where you want it to be. When you get to the superconscious, I think the only thing to do is enjoy, and that's not easy. I have another song called Simple Isn't Easy, and this is a good example. Just to enjoy is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. But I think that's the only thing to do when we get there, is just enjoy. And I think later on, if you study other belief systems or whatever, you find that there are some religions who believe that that's really why we're here on the earth, just to enjoy life. You don't have to agree with that, but that's the only one I've found that'll keep me at that level. So when I get there, I want to stay there, because that's where I was headed. And as I say, I wouldn't want to explain it. I wouldn't want to say rule number one. There are no rules that I know of directly leading to that place, except I can say there's one rule that that always holds, and that is, after it's happened, if you've gotten there and you've really had a moment of truth with, you know, within yourself, with your fellow players, with the rest of the world, and so on, get a copy of the guest list. It's very important for whom you were playing. Very important. And the guest list includes the other people you're playing with, of course. You know, just remember the people that were there. That's one of the things I used to enjoy most about working at Bradley's in New York, because Bradley's was and still is, in fact, open later than any other jazz club in New York, and so all the other musicians just naturally gravitate to Bradley's after their gigs, and you don't, when you work there, you don't have to go to the other clubs. Everybody comes there. But the nice thing, the real nice thing is that you play usually 4 sets there, and the 4th set had better be the best one, because that's when everybody, you know, all your friends, people who play the same instrument, come and put their ear on you and almost wish they had your gig, you know. And so playing 3 or 4 weeks in a row at Bradley's was the only way I've found to significantly improve my playing. You know, under that kind of, you go under the microscope, you know. It was a great forum. And I miss it now. What happened was Bradley himself, Bradley Cunningham, the owner, died a couple of years ago, and now it's run by his widow, Wendy, and she should be selling hamburgers.
I know Wendy.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, I met her last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. First, communication within ourselves. We're talking about trying to get this lust to play jazz out through the instrument without losing too much in the translation. How do we do that? How do we do that? That's another simple isn't easy kind of thing, you know. I always say one of the most important things, also simple isn't easy, is to get to the job having had a nice day. Now that sounds real easy, but the idea is to come into the place with a good gut feeling. I've obviously been working on that. and just want to spread this feeling to the other people in the club through your music, you know.
Well, I mean, that's not the way how to translate the feeling. That's just the feeling you have.
Yeah, that's just the beginning of it. Yeah, you want to get to the gig with the good feeling.
That's sure.
That's the first step. Well, as I said, it's very simple, but it's not easy. Okay, we take it from there now. How do we translate that feeling into music? Well, I think the choice of tune is important at all times. If you have anything to say about choosing what you're going to play, choice of partner is important. I think it's very important to be real choosy about who you play with. Any comments on that?
Do you think that you cannot give the same with the music, even if it's good, when you play together with people you don't feel good with?
No, that's right, I do. No, I could play like an amateur in a second if I play with someone. A Swedish tenor player once said that the reason he loves Tommy Flanagan so much is, we worked together as a trio. His name is Nisse Sandström, and Tommy and he and I worked together as a trio. He says the reason he loves Tommy Flanagan so much is that when he falls down, Tommy Flanagan falls down too. Yeah, Tommy Flanagan is sensitive, and I am sensitive. I'm a chameleon. I play really different with different people. very important. It's very important with whom I'm playing, and then it's also important to change partners. So you bring out different aspects of your own personality.
So you always try to find people you get a good feeling with?
Always.
Always,
Yes.
yeah.
Always. 100.000% of the time. Yeah. Yeah.
What happens if you go to I don't know if you still play session when you, or if you remember you played sessions and there were some people you didn't feel good with?
Yes, I remember. That was a good learning process. I did go through that for years, very many years. Yeah, welcome. In the very beginning, for me, what I call the bad old days in New York, we used to play sessions around the clock, and there was usually somebody there who wasn't up to par, for some reason. We were all learning, and there might be somebody there who was evil too, and if he didn't like the drummer, he'd play, pam, 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 right along with the drummer, till the drummer crawled out of the door. There was a lot of that going on. I remember my response to it at the time. Sometimes it'd be 6 horn players. In the beginning, sessions were private. They weren't commercialized. I'm talking about the 40s now. The club owners hadn't found out that they could be popular yet. So they were private. We would all pay $2 or a little bit of wine or something to rent a studio. And there'd be maybe anywhere from 0 to 8 horn players, and they'd all want to play a lot of choruses. And so I remember promising myself I was never going to play the same bass line on blues in F, no matter how many choruses they played. It was a challenge. I got mad sometimes. I said, God damn, you can play till, 1952. Anybody ever hear that record where it gets really swinging and somebody hollers, "Oh, play that thing till 1952!" That's a classic. Anyway, I used to try to develop, even if it was blues in F or C, I'll Remember April or something that everybody knew and I had already played 1,000 times. I promised myself I would not play the same bass line twice. I would not repeat myself. And that was a challenge. So it was a learning process. But then I got better at it, and I got more jobs, and then I moved out to California from New York, which is where I started. And I got into the studios, and then we got all kinds of other requirements, like, hey, you've got one note that's too loud there, starting in 1952, and then later. He was also Gary Carr's teacher, and Henry Lewis, and Mingus studied with him for a while, and Ray Brown, and a lot of people. He was the most inspiring teacher I ever had. I went to him with this problem. I said, hey, I was in the recording studio, and they told me my G is too loud. What do I do? He said, thank God you've got one loud note. He said, he said, someday some conductor is going to say, can we have a little more G at once? He's going to say, no problem, sir. And then he went on to show me 3, 4, 5 ways to damp the G. Put your knee up against the back. Put a fish weight on the string, on the other side of it. Lift the bow up. Don't grab as hard with your left hand. Just get a light grip. Well, the open G. Okay, that was the problem. But awesome. Then, of course, you can just play it lighter. Then I went through years in the studios and finally walked away from that scene in 1968 and moved to Sweden. And then, at that time, I made myself about 6 promises. One of them was that I will never, ever again play 2 notes exactly the same. Not even 2 notes. No, they'll all be different. Every note will say something different. And I will never, ever again take a job that I don't believe I'm going to love. Now, I've been wrong a couple of times, and I've made a couple of exceptions for special reasons, But since 1968, I've been able to stick to that. And I hope you can see that tonight when Fritz Power and I play at the other school. We have already played together, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure I'm going to love it. That's what I've been doing since 1968. I think that's very important. Pick your company, pick your tune. Okay, we're getting on with how do you translate these feelings into music without losing too much in the translation. Be sure you pick the right tempo, especially bass players. Don't let the horn players pick the tempos. No, they don't have to sleep with them. We have to sleep with them. You know, you want to be able to get it up. Anyway, that's I think in many cases the bass player should pick the tempo. Occasionally, you'll run into somebody. Well, some people really can pick good tempos, and then of course you let them do that. Clark Terry, for example, he could just walk out on the stand and it's already swinging, and you don't even know what the tune is yet. I got a great rhythm lesson one time from Freddie Green. I had known him since 1948 when I worked opposite him in New York. But it was a few years ago when Count Basie was still alive, and the band had a day off in Stockholm. They were staying at what we call the Jazz Hotel, which is 2 blocks from where I live, so they invited me to. And I walked in, and there was Freddie Green sitting alone at a table, and I sat down. And that's the first time I ever had the nerve to ask him, how do you do what you do? You know, can you verbalize it? You know, and he could. To let him know where I was coming from, I gave him a little poem that I'd written. It says, it isn't really rigid metronomic time that counts. It's sound and soul, communication, love, support, and bounce. And he thought that was nice, and I said, okay, then how do you do what you do? I told him also I thought he should be in the Guinness Book of Records, because I think he's played more swinging quarter notes than any other human being that ever lived. You know, over 50 years, nothing but quarter notes. Yeah, and never missed. Not one that didn't swing, right? And he said, well, the first thing is you've got to get the first beat right. And I said, you mean one of each bar? And he said, no, the first beat of the whole piece. You've got to get that right. If you get that right, you've got a good chance to get the second one right. Oh, he said, if you don't, it's all over. Oh, well, okay. How do you get the first beat right? And he said, well, it depends on who's tapping off the tempo. And then he went into a little thing about how he and Basie had this relationship where they really understood each other, you know. But there were times when he would think that Basie was counting it off a little too fast or a little too slow, and he would take it his way, you know. He would sense where the band wanted to play it, and then he would get that first beat right, and he did every time. I wish I'd had a tape recorder. He gave me about 45 minutes, and it was mind-blowing. It really was. He could verbalize what he did. He knew what he was doing. I later got to do a tour with him, which I took just because he was on it. It was a tribute to Count Basie tour. And I watched him every night and watched his hand. I studied him, you know. And I got a little close to him one time. He didn't want to go any farther. I said, I noticed that your hand, when you make the beat, when you pick the guitar, your hand goes through this basic baby motion that, you know how babies, when they wave at you, they don't go like this. They go like, you know, it's like, kind of like that. And he said he didn't want to talk about that. Okay, all right, okay. But that's what I noticed. It looked like that to me. That it was coming from way down deep inside, and the whole arm was loose, and the whole thing it wasn't just a finger motion. It was coming from way down inside, and the whole thing was like a reflex, for whatever that's worth. And a scent of magnolia, and I've met, you know, the normal cruise. Sorry, baby, no, it'll never sell in the South, you know. I can hear that. But and this one, God Bless the Child has got his own. It's about the gap between those who have and those who have not, you know. And there's a bigger gap there today than there was when she wrote it. I think it's more necessary today than it was then. And one of the things I like to do on that tune is play the title line, play the words. And I really feel it. I mean, when I introduce the song, I tell, I talk something like I'm talking now. There are other ways to do that. It's all about communication with the audience. Dexter Gordon had a way of going through the first 4 bars of the lyric, and then people would understand what he meant. And my way of doing it is to say why she wrote the song. It happened when she went to her mother to borrow some money. She had set her mother up with a restaurant. She had given her the money to start a restaurant. And then later on she got into some kind of trouble and she went to her mother, and her mother said no. And that's when she wrote this one. So it's kind of bitter. God bless the child who's got his own. It's like that. Oh, something's wrong.
Here we go.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm here, the words. Mom may have, God bless the child who's got his own. See if you can hear the words. And so on. I don't want to do the whole tune for you, but you see what I mean. I want to say something that I'm angry about. I really want to say something. Got something to tell. This is a story. Damn, this lady was serious. That means. And all that's in the song. That all comes out through the bass. Now, it doesn't have to be angry. It can be happy. It can be just sad. It can be anything. It's got to be. You got to be honest about it. It's got to be what you really feel, because when you're playing jazz, when you're playing a solo, your only true. I shouldn't say your only. Your first and best source for your composition is your own feelings. Your own feelings. You have to know what they are. You have to be in touch with them. You have to spit them up. You say that. If you hold in a little bitter feeling because you think it's inconvenient or it won't sell in the South, or you get lynched if you play it or something, then it'll block a big, beautiful one that might have come after it. That's what the blues was about, by the way. We can get right into the blues from there, which was one of the roots of jazz, of course. People working in the cotton fields for nothing, getting whipped, getting 4 basses, and I was playing 4th. They needed somebody who could kind of scratch along with the bow and then play the rhythm parts when it came to play rhythm. And the first bass player was Milt Kestenbaum, who had played Porgy and Bess the show on Broadway when it opened. And second was Pete Mercurio, one of the best, most simpatico bass players in the world, right? Fantastic symphony player. Didn't know anything about jazz, didn't want to, but great with the bow. And Abe Blueballs. And so the introduction, the first thing you get in Porgy and Bess as a bass player is that figure that Gershwin wrote for the xylophone. He put it right down to the basses. It starts with a xylophone. And it goes right through the violins, cellos, right on down to the basses, And after the first couple of rundowns, I mean, it sounded like a train wreck. Man. It really did. A horrible train wreck. And got down, first of all, Andre apologized to us. He said, I'm very sorry, Gershwin was not that good an orchestrator. He should never have written that for the basses. And Milt Kessenbaum said, you're right. He said, it's funny, but when I played this show on Broadway, when the show opened, he said, I couldn't play it then either. But what they did do, the other three guys could scrub that fast with the bow, which I couldn't do. You know, I couldn't do that. But they couldn't make the accents. They couldn't make the syncopation. So we divided it up, and I just made the syncopations, you know. So that, yeah, like that. And so they left it off the record, and then the record came out. It was not on the show record. But we kind of solved it temporarily. Like that. There are other ways to get drummers. We're still talking about getting drummers to, there are other ways.
Do you ever use your actual body movement?
Oh, yeah.
Back or lean forward?
Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things that Freddie Green said, by the way. Freddie Green gave me this great rhythm lesson. They had a new young drummer on Count Basie's band at that time. And after our discussion was all over, the drummer came over to me and he said, what'd he say, what'd he say? You know? And I told him as clearly as I could. Freddie Green said, he said, I would never turn around to the drummer and say, hey, you're a dragon, or something. But if he is, I'll lean into the guitar and play more intensely, and I expect him to see that and hear it. Or if he's rushing, I'll lean back like this and do this and let him hear it. I expect him to see that and hear it. And that was one thing that Freddie Green had with the Count Basie Orchestra, which they've never been able to replace, even though they've had some good guitar players since. And they tried it with no guitar for a while. It was that authority that he had. He could, without doing any more than lifting an eyebrow, you know.
Well, I mean, this can only help if you're really an authority.
Yeah.
Because if you're playing like that, the drummer thinks, oh my, I must keep him back. And
Well, I think the bass player and the first trumpet player should have a very close personal relationship. The lead trumpet player and the bass player. Pitch-wise and time-wise, those are the frames of the music, you know. Those are the outer frames, the first trumpet and the bass. And so every big band I've ever played on, which isn't that many, but I've had experience with Woody Herman and Stan Kent, and then many years in the studios with big bands. I'm always trying to build a friendship with the first trumpet player, because you really got to hit at the same time. And the trumpet player is supposed to be in a position to tell the other trumpet players. They're supposed to follow the first trumpet player, you know. There are, then it depends on who the band leader is and so on. If you can communicate with the band leader, I think it's a very good idea to do that. And what some band leaders will do then is, for a rehearsal, send the rhythm section home and just rehearse the horns. Thad Jones used to do that sometimes, rehearse the horns so that the horns are swinging by themselves. Of course, there's a certain amount of bending that the rhythm section can and should